Can you cook for two? The lonely rancher asked the hungry widow. By winter, she ran his whole ranch. Ira Finch took the last meal ticket from Hannah Vale's hand and held it up for the whole dry, hollow freight station to see. Widow Vale still owes for burying her husband, he said. She eats today only if she signs my kitchen note. The cook pulled the coffee pot away. One freight hand stared at the floor. Another gave Ira a thin smile. No one told him to give the ticket back. Hannah stood with her black bonnet strings faded gray from road dust and her carpetbag light enough to shame her. She was 36 years old, 3 months widowed, down to 1 nickel sewn into her hem, with no room for the night and nowhere else to go before dark. Then a rancher in the doorway placed a silver dollar on the counter. Can you cook for two? Hannah turned. The man in the doorway was tall, raw-boned, and weathered as split cedar. His hat was black with a broken crease. His coat had been brushed clean, but the cuff was mended with brown thread. He did not smile as if he had rescued her. He looked at the empty cup in her hand, then at her face, and waited. I can cook for 20 if there is something to cook, Hannah said. Tonight there is beans, salt pork, 2 onions, and a man at my ranch with a kicked leg who has been cussing my coffee since noon. He nodded toward the silver dollar. I pay before the meal, supper for 2. If you say no, the dollar stays yours for hearing me out. Ira laughed. Rowan Maddox, you lost 3 cooks this fall. Don't pretend you're offering kindness. Split Kettle is where kitchens go to die. The rancher did not look away from Hannah. That may be so. Still, I asked for supper, not ownership. That word made the station colder. Hannah set down the empty cup. I will cook 1 supper. 1 supper, Rowan said. Then you decide the next step. He put the dollar in her hand before Ira could touch it. The ride to Split Kettle Ranch took place under a sky the color of old iron. Rowan drove a 2-horse wagon and kept a clean space between them on the seat. He asked nothing about her husband until she offered the smallest piece. Daniel Vale died near Alkali Bend, she said. Fever after a bad claim. I'm sorry. People are sorry until supper. Rowan glanced at her then, and something in his expression shifted without softening into pity. Then we had better see what supper can do. Split Kettle was not a poor ranch. Hannah saw that before the wagon reached the yard. The fences were straight enough. The hay shed stood full enough. The barns had good roofs. But the place moved wrong. Men crossed the yard without purpose. A milk cow bawled beside an empty trough. Smoke poured from the kitchen chimney like someone had fed it green chips and temper. Inside the ranch kitchen, a dented pot had boiled dry. Beans stuck to the bottom black as stove polish. A young hand lay in the next room with his boot cut away and his face white with pain. This is Tom Rill, Rowan said. He is the second mouth. Tom tried to sit up. If you can make boss's coffee fit for Christians, ma'am, I will call you general. Hannah washed her hands, tied on the clean apron Rowan found hanging behind the door, and took account of the room. Beans could be saved if a woman did not mind scraping. Salt pork was hard but honest. The onions had green hearts. Flour sat in a sack near the stove, lumpy at the corners but not hopeless. She did not perform magic, she made supper. She fried salt pork thin enough to crack. She cut onions into the grease, stirred in scraped beans, and made flat cakes with water hot enough to wake the flour. By the time she carried plates to the table, Tom had stopped cussing. Rowan stood with his hat in both hands as if the kitchen had become a church. Sit, Hannah said. Food cools. Rowan sat. He ate the first bite quietly. Tom ate 3 bites and closed his eyes. General, Tom said. Hannah almost smiled, but hunger had taught her not to spend warmth too early. After supper, Rowan washed his own plate. That told her more than any speech. There is a bunkroom off the wash shed, he said. Door latches from inside. If you want town tomorrow, I drive you. If you want a week of wages, I can offer cookhouse work. Not wife work, not charity work, cookhouse work. And if your men object, then they can eat their objections. She looked toward the yard, where a broad-shouldered man had stopped near the pump. He had pale hair, a square jaw, and the fixed look of someone counting what could be taken. That your foreman? She asked. Nate Dorr. He looked at me like I was a leak in his roof. Rowan's mouth tightened. Nate looks at most people like a cost. And you keep him. until I know which costs I can survive. The answer was honest enough to trouble her. The next morning, Nate Dorr walked into the kitchen without knocking while Hannah was stirring mush. "Widow," he said, "boss takes in strays when winter scares him. Don't mistake that for a place." "One complaint from the crew and I strike your name from the wage list," Nate said. "Snow is coming. A woman without a room should remember who decides whether she keeps one." Hannah did not stop stirring. Men who enter kitchens without knocking should not mistake silence for welcome. Tom laughed from the bench near the door. Nate's face hardened. A woman named Pearl Ames came in behind him carrying a basket of damp cloths. She was thin, sharp-nosed, and old enough to know better than the quick smile she gave Nate. "Pantry is near empty," Pearl said. "Foreman says so, best keep breakfast small." Hannah looked at the shelves. 2 jars of molasses, dried apples, beans, coffee. A crock of lard hidden behind a cracked bowl, not plenty but not empty. "Breakfast will be enough," Hannah said. By noon, she understood the ranch's sickness. Men had been fed late, then blamed for slow work. Salt had gone missing from the curing shed. Flour sacks were left where damp crept up from the floor. The coffee was stretched with burned chicory until even the loyal hands cursed the pot. Nate told the crew Rowan had lost his nerve and would sell the ranch by spring. A hungry ranch did not always lack food. Sometimes it lacked order. For 1 week, Hannah cooked with her sleeves rolled and her eyes open. She wrote no ledger because men got nervous when a woman wrote what they wanted forgotten. Instead, she counted aloud. 6 men to the north fence, 2 to the barn roof, Tom on a chair shelling beans because his leg is no excuse for boredom. Dinner at noon if the wood box is full by 11. "Who made you trail, boss?" Nate asked. "Nobody," Hannah said. "I am only explaining how noon works." The men laughed again. This time more of them meant it. Rowan watched from the doorway, and Hannah felt his attention like heat from a stove she had not meant to stand near. He never praised her in front of the men in a way that made her seem his property. He did smaller, harder things. He put her wages in an envelope every Saturday and left it on the kitchen table while Pearl was present. He moved his own supper to the far end of the table when the room emptied, so no man could call her corner his. Once, when rain struck the roof and the crew lingered in the cookhouse, Rowan reached for the coffee pot at the same moment she did. Their fingers touched the handle. It was nothing. It was not nothing. Hannah drew back first. Rowan's voice lowered. "I won't make hunger answer questions it should not have to hear." She looked at him then. His eyes were gray, tired, and steadier than she had expected a lonely man's eyes to be. "What questions?" she asked. "Whether you stay because you want to, or because there is supper here." Her throat tightened. "Then do not ask yet." "I won't." That was the first promise she believed. Nate made his first hard move the following Monday. Hannah cut open a flour sack marked sound and found the inside clumped sour with damp. The second sack was worse. By the third, the kitchen smelled of rot. Pearl clucked her tongue. "Widow must have stored it wrong." "It was stacked before I came." Nate stepped into the doorway with 3 hands behind him. "Flour was sound when I counted it. If she has ruined winter bread, boss, that is on you for letting station hunger into a ranch kitchen." The words hit their mark. The men looked from Hannah to Rowan. Winter without bread was not a small fear. Rowan came to the flour sacks, knelt, and put one hand against the bottom seam. Mud flaked onto his palm. These sat on wet boards for weeks. "She could have moved them," Nate said. Lige bent before anyone asked him and pressed 2 fingers to the seam. When they came away dark, he looked at Nate instead of Hannah. "Careful," Nate said. Hannah took the ruined flour in both hands and let it fall back into the sack. "I can make paste for sealing cracks, not bread. I can stretch beans, cut biscuit with cornmeal if there is any, and dry apples for the line shacks. But I cannot feed men on lies." Nate's jaw jumped. Rowan stood. "Then we stop feeding on them. Hannah counts every store today." "You giving her ranch authority now?" Nate asked. "I am giving her pantry authority because she knows what flour is." It sounded almost foolish, and maybe that was why the men accepted it. Not a grand declaration, a fact. That evening, Rowan found Hannah on the back step with her wage envelope unopened beside her. I can take you to town tomorrow, he said. You have enough for a boarding room and a train east if you want one. You promised a week. I promised choice too. She looked across the yard. Nate stood near the barn speaking to Pearl. Pearl's head bent like a weed in bad weather. If I leave now, Hannah said, he will tell them I ruined the flower and ran. Let him talk. I have lived under talk. It eats cheaper than men do and lasts longer. She put the envelope in her apron pocket. Give me 1 month and the right to count stores in daylight. If the ranch still wants me gone after that, I will go with my wages. Rowan's hands closed on the porch rail. The ranch does not get a vote on your dignity. No, she said, but it gets a vote on whether it survives winter. The next morning, Hannah opened every pantry, smokehouse, barrel, and shed with 2 crewmen watching. She found enough beans for 5 weeks if stretched, dried beef hidden behind horse tack, apples that needed cutting that day, and only half the salt Rowan had paid for. Salt walks, she asked. One of the men, Lige, shifted his hat. Nate handles freight. Salt does not walk, Hannah said. Men carry it. Pearl went pale. Rowan unfolded a paper he had been holding like something dirty. South herd buyer comes in 3 weeks. If I deliver weight before the heavy snow, Split Kettle breathes another year. If I fail, Vance Door buys my note cheap. Nate's brother, Hannah said. Yes. She looked at the half-empty salt shelf, the damp flour, the stretched coffee, and the men waiting to hear whether hunger was only weather or someone's plan. He is not stealing from you, she said. He is starving you into selling. Rowan's jaw worked once. Then we count before he sells another lie. Hannah did not accuse her. Not yet. A woman cornered too soon would bite the nearest hand, even if it was the one reaching to help. Instead, Hannah changed the ranch. Breakfast came before first light for riders. Dinner was tied to completed work, not Nate's temper. Hot mash waited for teams before hard pulls. Tom, still limping, marked which line shacks had kindling and which had only pride. The work began to go faster. Lige brought in 2 rabbits without being asked. Tom carved a board and hung it near the kitchen door. Mrs. Vale's orders, he had scratched at the top. Hannah stared at it. Take that down. Tom's grin faded. Didn't mean offense. I am not mistress of this ranch. Rowan, who had come in behind her, said quietly, No, but you may be the reason it is still a ranch. She turned too fast and nearly brushed his chest. He stepped back at once, giving her room before she had to ask for it. That restraint undid her more than closeness would have. You keep stepping away, she said. I keep remembering you came here hungry. And if I am not hungry now? His gaze held hers. For a moment the kitchen sounds dimmed. The stove tick, the wind at the chinked wall, Tom pretending not to listen. Then someday, Rowan said, when your wages are enough to leave twice over, I would like permission to ask you something besides work. Hannah's heart made a foolish reach. She folded it back carefully. Someday is not today. No. But after he left, she touched the order board with 2 fingers and did not ask Tom to take it down. The board changed how men spoke to her. The first time Hannah wrote, North Fence crew, carry cold biscuits, and the North Fence crew came back before dark instead of after. Lige tipped his hat to the board before he tipped it to Rowan. By the end of the next week, the cookhouse had become the place where the ranch confessed itself. A man would come in for coffee and mention a hinge gone bad on the smokehouse door. Tom, proud of being useful while his leg healed, marked each complaint with a stub pencil and brought the list to Hannah like dispatches from a war. I am not the army, she told him. No, ma'am, Tom said. Armies eat worse. Rowan heard that and turned away, but not before Hannah saw the smile he tried to hide. From the barn doorway, Nate watched the men read Hannah's board before they looked to him. The next morning, Hannah found Pearl crying behind the smokehouse. Pearl turned her face away fast, but not before Hannah saw the red mark across her wrist where a key ring had been yanked. Did Nate do that? Hannah asked. No. Pearl. The older woman hugged her arms tight. You don't understand men like him. I understand people who make fear sound like wages. Pearl's mouth trembled. For a moment Hannah thought she would speak. Then Nate shouted her name from the yard. Pearl, you counting smoke or working? Pearl covered the mark before he even appeared. Lige, carrying kindling past the smokehouse, saw her flinch and kept walking, but more slowly. Hannah watched her go, angry and sad in equal measure. Betrayal was seldom tidy. Pearl was not a villain in a black hat. She was a woman who had chosen the side that seemed most likely to feed her. Hannah could hate the harm and still recognize the hunger under it. There were evenings when she almost forgot to be careful. Rowan would come in after the crew had gone and mend a chair rung while she banked the stove. He never settled too close. He never spoke as if quiet made them promised. He asked about Daniel once, gently, and Hannah surprised herself by answering more than she meant to. He was not cruel, she said, wiping the table already clean. Only weak where hope was concerned. He believed every man who said gold lay just over the next ridge. Rowan twisted rawhide around the chair rung. That can be a costly kind of weakness. It cost him his life, and me nearly everything but my name. Did you love him? The question might have angered her from another mouth. From Rowan, it arrived without claim. I honored what I had promised, she said after a while. Some days that looked like love, some days it looked like carrying water to a man who had spent our flour on another map. Rowan nodded once. I had a brother like that. Vance Dorr and Nate got him to sign freight paper he did not understand. I paid it because my mother was still living and shame would have killed her quicker than fever. Is that why Nate is still here? Partly because I thought watching a thief was safer than wondering where he had gone. Hannah set the cloth down. A watched thief still steals if he knows you are afraid to name him. Rowan looked at her then. You name things plainly. Hunger does that, it strips politeness first. That afternoon Hannah found the missing half-sack of coffee in the harness room under a moldy tarp. She carried it into the yard and dropped it at Nate's feet. Coffee wandered too, she said. Several hands stopped what they were doing. Nate looked down at the sack, then at her. Harness room stays drier than your pantry. Then why was it under wet canvas? Ask the mice. Mice do not tie square knots. The men nearest them looked at the rope around the sack. Lige's expression hardened. Lige crouched and rolled the knot between his fingers. That is your freight knot, Nate. You taught it to me. Nate's smile vanished. Careful which side you choose. Lige stood and moved beside Hannah. I just did. Nate's mouth twisted. Careful, widow. Accusing a foreman is easier than proving it. I did not accuse you, Hannah said. I asked if mice tie knots. Rowan came from the barn then, carrying a hammer. He took in the sack, the knots, the men, Hannah's still face, and Nate's smile. Coffee goes to the kitchen, Rowan said. Harness room gets harness. Nate's smile thinned. You letting this become a trial? No, Rowan said. I am letting coffee become coffee. It was not enough to punish Nate. Hannah knew it. Rowan knew it too, but the men heard the line. Another little obedience shifted. That night, Rowan came to the cookhouse after supper with fear standing raw in his face. My father built the first barn with borrowed nails, he said. My mother planted apple seeds that never took. My brother died chasing freight money. I have buried so much in this ground that sometimes I cannot tell whether I am keeping a ranch or guarding graves. Hannah moved before caution stopped her. She put her hand over his on the table. His fingers were cold. Then stop guarding graves, she said. Feed the living. He looked at their hands, so did she. Neither moved for 3 heartbeats. Then Rowan turned his hand just enough to hold hers. Not tightly, not publicly, a question made of touch. Hannah let him for 1 breath, then 2. On the 3rd, she drew away. Someday is not today, he said softly. No, she answered, but it may be closer than it was. Nate's second move came with the first hard frost. His brother, Vance Dorr, rolled into Split Kettle with 3 freight wagons and a smile full of silver teeth. He opened a cash box on the wagon seat. Silver flashed where every hand could see it. He offered cash wages to any hand willing to haul ore before the pass closed. More than cash, he offered certainty. Maddox sells South Herd in panic or loses it in snow, Vance told the men. Work for me, you eat all winter. Nate stood beside him, arms folded, and pointed toward the cookhouse. Maddox lets a station beggar ration your plates. Sign with Vance now and you eat through winter. Ben took one step toward the wagon, then stopped. Hannah heard from the kitchen window. Rowan heard from the barn. He crossed the yard with his face calm and his shoulders tight. You recruiting my crew at my pump. Vance smiled, just giving men options. Then give them off my ground. Nate spat into the dirt. Options are more than you gave them. You let a widow cut rations and call it management. The yard went silent. Hannah wiped her hands, came out, and stood on the cookhouse step. She felt every eye find her. Once, hunger would have made her shrink. Now it steadied her. A woman who had counted beans for winter knew the weight of every watching man. Rations were cut because the salt was missing, the flour was spoiled, and someone has been promising failure before snow fell, she said. Nate laughed. Hear that? She thinks coffee gives her a crown. No, Hannah said. Work gives a person standing. You taught me that by trying to take mine. Vance looked amused. Widow, freight pays better than burnt beans. Then feed your men at your own fire. Somebody coughed a laugh. Nate's face darkened. Careful. Rowan took one step toward him, but Hannah lifted a hand. Not to stop Rowan like she owned him, to ask him to trust her. He stopped. That was the moment the crew saw it. Rowan Maddox, who had built Split Kettle with silence and stubbornness, let Hannah Vale hold the center of his yard. Nate saw it too. First storm, he said, voice low. We will see if speeches keep cattle warm. The first storm arrived 3 nights later, early and mean. It came down from the north with sleet under its teeth. By dawn, the water troughs wore gray skins of ice. By noon, snow blew sideways across the yard and cattle bunched wrong against the west fence, crowding toward a low draw where drift could bury calves by morning. Rowan went out with Lige and 3 hands to bring the teams around. Hannah packed hot mash, coffee, and strips of dried beef for the riders. She was tying cloth around the last kettle when a horse screamed. She ran to the door. Rowan was down in the yard beside the near team, one arm braced wrong under him. The bay mare danced, wild-eyed. Nate shouted from the barn for men to unhitch and leave the south herd. Let them drift, he yelled. Save the teams. Vance has wagons moving east in 1 hour. Hannah saw the whole ranch balance on that shout. If the men ran to Vance's wagons, the south herd would freeze against the draw. Rowan would lose the contract, perhaps the ranch. Nate would say winter made the decision. Hannah grabbed the order board from the kitchen wall and stepped into the storm. Snow hit her face like thrown sand. Lige, she shouted. 2 men to Rowan, do not move his shoulder until I get a sling. Tom, open the east hay shed. Use the small key on the nail, not Nate's ring. Ben, take hot mash to the teams before they founder. Cal, you and Jory cut the west fence rope and push the cows toward the hay meadow. Nate wheeled on her. You don't give cattle orders. I give survival orders. You will get men killed. You already aimed them at empty wagons. Vance's freight team stood near the gate, canvas snapping. He called, any man coming with me comes now. A gust tore one wagon flap loose. 2 salt sacks slid against the rail, Split Kettle burned into the burlap. Ben stared from the brand to Nate. Those are ours. Nate lunged for the canvas. Pearl stepped from the wash shed and blocked him with both hands shaking. No, she said. Hannah looked at her. Pearl swallowed. He hid 2 salt sacks in Vance's wagon, said if the ranch went hungry, Mr. Rowan would sell before Christmas. For one breath, nobody moved. Then Lige ran to Rowan. Tom limped for the east hay shed. Ben grabbed the mash bucket. One by one, the men chose the ranch. Nate cursed and shoved past her, but by then Lige had come up with 2 other hands. Not with guns, not with drama, with the hard, quiet faces of men who had eaten thin meals because another man wanted power. Move aside, Nate, Lige said. Nate tried one last turn. He pointed at Rowan, who was sitting now with his injured arm bound against his coat. Maddox, you hear this? Your widow has taken your ranch. The wind shoved snow across the yard. Rowan looked at Hannah. She stood with her apron whipping under her coat, hair coming loose from its pins, one hand still on the order board. She looked cold, furious, and alive in a way that made his chest hurt worse than his shoulder. No, Rowan said. She is saving it. That broke Nate's last hold. Nate shouted for the men to stand down. Not one stopped. Lige turned his back on him and faced Hannah. You heard Mrs. Vale, Lige said. Give us the next order. Ben and Cal followed. Nate was still foreman in name, but the yard no longer answered him. The men moved. For the next 6 hours, Hannah ran Split Kettle from the storm yard. She sent hot coffee to the fence cutters and mash to the teams. She ordered the hay meadow opened in strips so the cattle would move instead of pile. She put Tom at the kitchen table with a pencil to mark which men had gone where, because a hurt leg could still save lives if it kept count. She made Pearl heat bricks and wrapped them for Rowan's shoulder, then sent Pearl back out to tell the truth about the salt in front of every man who returned. Nate and Vance tried to leave with the salt sacks. They did not get past the gate. Ben and Cal lifted the sacks down without asking permission. Vance shouted about freight law. Lige told him to freight himself elsewhere. By dusk, Vance's wagons rolled empty toward the road, and Nate stood alone near the pump with snow collecting on his hat brim. The south herd reached the hay meadow. Not all were saved. 3 calves were lost in the draw before the fence rope was cut. Hannah made herself look at them. A ranch did not become whole because a woman gave orders. It became whole because people counted the cost and did not lie. After dark, the men came into the cookhouse one by one, wet, shaking, and hungry. Hannah fed them beans, dried beef, and coffee so strong it could have pulled a wagon. Nobody complained. Rowan sat near the stove with his arm bound. His face was gray with pain, but his eyes followed her as she moved through the room. When Nate entered, the talking stopped. He had packed his bedroll. He looked at Rowan. You throwing me out because a widow got scared in snow. Rowan rose slowly. Pain dragged at him, but he stood. I am removing you because you spoiled stores, hid salt, tried to pull my crew in a storm, and used my fear of losing this ranch to feed your brother's wagons. You cannot run Split Kettle without me. Rowan looked around the cookhouse, at Lige with frost still in his beard, at Tom with pencil stains on his fingers, at Pearl, pale and ashamed near the stove, at Hannah who stood behind no man. I already was, Rowan said, poorly. A few men looked down, not from shame at Rowan, but because truth had entered and taken a chair. Rowan unpinned the foreman's tally from the board near the door. It was a small strip of brass with Nate DORR scratched into it. He set it on the table. No calf share, no bunkhouse, no freight use. You leave at first light, and if Vance wants payment for the salt he carried off my ranch, he can ask the snow. Nate's mouth opened. Nobody came to his side. Lige lifted Nate's bedroll and set it outside the cookhouse door. No man rose to carry it farther. That was his cost, not the brass, not the words, the silence where obedience used to be. Pearl stepped forward before Nate could turn. I hid the pantry key twice, she said, voice trembling. He said if Mrs. Vale stayed, no decent woman would be needed in the cookhouse. Hannah felt the old sting of that. Hungry widow, station stray, not decent enough to feed. Pearl held out the key. Hannah did not take it at once. You will work day wages through winter if Mr. Maddox allows it. No keys, no ordering stores. You tell every hand before breakfast which sacks you helped hide. Pearl nodded, tears freezing on her lashes before they fell. And you will not call me station hunger again, Hannah said. No, ma'am. Hannah took the key. By winter, Split Kettle changed its sound. The yard no longer rang with Nate's sharp whistle. It rang with work called plain and answered plain. The cattle settled in the east meadow behind windbreaks Hannah had insisted on before the second storm. The smokehouse shelves held meat properly salted. Coffee was still thin on clear days, but now the men called it weather coffee and drank it laughing. Tom made a new order board from smooth pine. At the top he carved, Split Kettle Winter ORDRS H. Vale, Ranch Steward. Hannah stood before it on the first morning of true winter and could not speak. Rowan stood beside her, his injured arm still stiff in cold weather. He had shaved for the first time in 3 days and looked nervous enough to be endearing. The title comes with wages, he said. Real wages, written into the ranch account with Lige and Tom witnessing. It also comes with the right to tell me when I am being a fool. That is a large position. You have been filling it unpaid in spirit for weeks. She looked at the board, then at the yard beyond the window. Men moved because her chalk marks told them where needs stood. Pearl crossed the yard with an armload of kindling, no keys at her belt. Nate was gone. Vance's wagons had not returned. Hannah had arrived with one nickel sewn into her hem. Now the ranch waited for her morning word. "I accept the wages," she said. Rowan let out a breath. "And the right to call you a fool when needed." "Fair." She touched the carved H. Vale. "But do not make this a cage, Rowan." His face changed at the sound of his name. "I would burn the board first." She believed that, too. That evening, after the men had eaten and Pearl had taken the dishwater out, Hannah found Rowan on the cookhouse porch. Snow lay clean over the yard. Lantern light warmed the window behind them. For once, the ranch was quiet without feeling abandoned. Rowan held his hat in both hands, just as he had the first night. "Your wages are enough to leave twice over now," he said. Hannah's heart remembered the promise. "They are." "Then I would like to ask what I would not ask before." He looked down at his hat, then back at her. "May I court you, Hannah Vale, slowly, properly, with you running my ranch whether your answer is yes or no?" The lonely part of him stood in the open when he asked, not demanding shelter, offering it back. Hannah looked through the window at the long table where 2 plates remained from the late supper. The question from the freight station came back to her with all its hunger and all its mercy. "You asked if I could cook for 2, she said. His mouth softened. "I did." "I can." She stepped closer, near enough that their sleeves brushed, and this time neither moved away. "But by winter, I seem to be running the whole ranch." Rowan laughed once, low and unsteady. Hannah took his hat from his hands and hung it on the porch peg beside her shawl. "So yes," she said, "you may court me. Supper for 2 can wait until chores are done." Before dawn, Hannah hung the pantry key beneath H. Vale, ranch steward, and set 2 full cups below the board. Rowan's hat rested beside her shawl. Outside, snow erased Nate's last tracks. The woman once denied a meal now decided how every table at Split Kettle would be fed, and no one ate from pity again.